We're in the middle of wide receiver week here on Locked On Buckeyes. And as we take some time away from us oohing and eyeing at what Brian Hartline has done, bringing in two five-star receivers in the same week, how about we look at a current Buckeye receiver who is going to be a hot commodity in next year's NFL draft? It is Jaxon Smith-Njigba Day, and here to discuss what Jaxon Smith-Njigba is as a receiver and how he stacks up against other receivers around the country is Ryan Roberts from Rise and Draft Scouting. Guys, this is a fun conversation. You can only catch it right here on Locked On Buckeyes.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes, part of Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Wednesday, June 22nd in the year 2022. And here with us today, it's a guest that's been here numerous times. He is my favorite NFL draft scout from Rise and Draft Scouting. He is also a part of the team at Irish Breakdown. We'll discuss more about Notre Dame down the road. Looking forward to September the 3rd. It's Ryan Roberts, and he's not here talking Notre Dame. He is here being a scout. We're going to get Scout Hat today talking about Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Ryan, welcome back to the show.
I appreciate you, Jay. Appreciate it, man. It's every single year I can make. I'm 100% sure that I'll be on the wide receiver show for Ohio State with how they continue to recruit and continue to develop talent with Brian Hartline and all that crew. They just got if you're listening to this is tomorrow's show. So on Sunday, they just got Monday, they just got a big commitment from Carnell Tate, 5-star wide receiver. So I'm sure we'll be talking about him in 3 years as well. So it's just a pipeline of insane talent at the wide receiver position for the Ohio State Buckeyes. Unfortunately for Notre Dame. Unfortunately.
Ryan, I was planning on this show or this week being having a couple wide receiver shows, one for the current players projecting how they'll look for next year, the other one with you talking about what Jaxon Smith-Njigba will do and what kind of draft prospect he is. But then it turned into a full wide receiver week because of Carnell Tate's announcement on Monday. You said, I saw your quote tweet, I know where he's not going. I think everyone knew where he wasn't going. But yep. Ohio State got another elite receiver. Just from you being a college football fan, what do you admire about what Brian Hartline has done recruiting elite talent every single year?
Well, if Brian Hartline wasn't a great recruiter and he was just a developer, it would be enough, to be honest with you. Because, he continues to just push out guys. You talked about Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and what he has right now with Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And we'll talk about Njigba. I think that the finer points of playing the wide receiver position are in his game, specifically. So he's done a great job of developing him. But then you add in the layer of just what type of recruiter Brian Hartline is. We talked about Carnell Tate being, a commit that they got on Monday. I know they're in a good spot with Brandon Inniss, who's a big-time target for them in the 2023 class as well. This pipeline's not slowing down. For a pipeline to continue, it's got to start somewhere, and it's got to continue. And Ohio State's had a rich tradition of developing wide receivers in general, but Brian Hartline has taken it up a notch. So from a recruiting standpoint, from a development standpoint, there's probably no better wide receiver coach in college football.
Dude, that's insane to think about. And on Monday's show, I discussed about how receivers or just players in general, a lot of your elite guys at the NBA, Major League Baseball, NFL, the elite of the elite, they're not the best teachers, and they're not the best at transferring their knowledge to other people. I mentioned, and I want to say it again today, Magic Johnson used to coach I had a cup of coffee coaching in the NBA. He was trash. He was horrible. He didn't coach very long. You may say, Jay, he's the best point guard of all time. That's true. But he has a hard time transferring that knowledge from himself to the people he is trying to coach and teach. Brian Hartline he's not a future Hall of Famer in the NFL, not that kind of receiver. But what he's done is he's found a way to be a phenomenal teacher and to connect with people that are 18 to 22 years old, recruit them, and then to also develop them. And this is kind of scary, man. Like, I don't normally say things are scary. What Nick Saban has done at Alabama, that's scary. That's a scary run. What Ohio State has done basically running the conference in the Big Ten for quite a long time. It's scary. Now, there have been some hiccups along the way, but it's pretty scary. What Brian Hartline is doing right now, not has done, what he is doing, is scary. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, he could be promoted to OC. And, of course, if Ryan Day's still the coach, Ryan Day's like, okay, Brian, you got to have some more responsibilities recruiting the offense, but still go out there and get those receivers for me. I mean, you got that thing on lock. What he's doing right now is absolutely scary. And it's one thing that I hope Buckeye fans don't take for granted, because this is not normal. What Brian Hartline is doing, Ryan, right now with his recruiting and development of the receivers, it's not normal at all.
No, it's not. And I'll say one, I like your analogy to basketball coaching a little bit, because, I mean, for the most part, across sports, usually the best coaches are the guys that weren't the best players. You know, like I think in basketball, like Scott Skiles was a really good coach for a little while. Steve Kerr is a good coach. Like those are guys that had to get past with playing the game the right way, being fundamentally sound. They're not the most talented players of all time. And I think that kind of really works all the way through every sport. And Brian Hartline, like you said, when he was at Ohio State, he had some length to him, but like he was a crafty route runner, could do the little things, and then he parlayed that into a pretty successful NFL career. You know, like he's stuck around for a while despite not being the most physically gifted guy of all time. So I think that really does parlay into what makes him such a successful coach, and it's not going to stop anytime soon, Jay, because either way, like I think that you can entice a guy like him, like co-offensive coordinator role, he's the passing game coordinator, whatever he is. The question long-term is obviously going to be, what are Brian Hartline's main goals, right? Like, does he want to be a college football head coach? Does he want to be a NFL assistant coach, or maybe NFL head coach long-term? Like, what are the career outlooks? But for now, the pipeline at Ohio State for wide receivers is not slowing down.
We are here with Ryan Robertson from Rise and Draft Scouting. He is also a part of the team at Irish Breakdown. Now talking Notre Dame today. We'll talk about them down the road leading up to that big matchup on September the 3rd. The rest of the show is not talking about Brian Hartline. It's all dedicated to Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Some other receivers will be sprinkled in, but this is primarily Smith-Njigba's show. Ryan, as you have been watching film of him from last year, what impresses you about Jaxon Smith-Njigba when he's on the football field?
Well, I mean, I was just looking at just the database that we have at Rise and Draft, and I mean, he's a 2002 kid, so he's still 20 years old, and that takes me so off guard for a second, because I know he's only a true junior, so I should expect that age to be relatively in that ballpark, but he is such a just nuanced and advanced player at his position. You know, it's the route running prowess, it's the understanding of how to attack spacing, it's consistent hands catcher. I feel like everything he does in a really good level, you know, like everything he does. And I have a good comp for you later in the show, Jay, but just for me, there's just such a maturity to how he plays the game. Like that's the thing that's really stands out. And I know he plays, I think I saw the split was like 89% of his snaps were in the slot last year, which he's going to be a slot receiver on the next level, which is no big deal. It's just, that's where he's going to play. And when you're playing that position, you have to understand spacing. You have to understand route discipline. You have to understand how to run routes in general and creates easy separation. And Jaxon Smith-Njigba does that from a short to intermediate threat to even pushing vertically at times from the slot. He's a tough guy to match up with, man. Like, I mean, just point blank to it. There's a maturity level to him that is very rare for a player his age. Very, very rare.
Now, you say that he is better suited at the slot now, but even at the next level versus outside X or Z, whichever one you wanted to describe. Why is he better suited at the slot?
Well, I think he could play some Z, but I don't think that he's going to play outside I think he can play outside. I'm actually curious to see, because I've heard Ohio State is going to kind of keep him inside at slot. I would like to see him outside a little bit just to kind of see some of the traits from the Z position or from the X position. But for me, I don't see a dynamic athlete. Like, I don't think he's going to run incredibly fast. I think that he is much more quick twitch athlete, quick separator, and nuanced route runner to create separation. I don't think he's a guy that can get on top of guys consistently as a deep threat. So if he's playing X, like that's a position where you're going to have a lot of one-on-ones, but you're also a guy that needs to be able to threaten vertically. And I don't think that's going to be his game necessarily. So a position inside at slot where navigating and manipulating space is kind of the biggest selling points. I think that's just kind of why he fits better inside a little bit.
I'm also curious to see if they do anything with him as far as motioning into the backfield, having him in the backfield versus motioning outside, more of those new age type of plays, little wrinkles to the playbook that Ryan Day can utilize. Emeka Egbuka is a guy who I know will probably, if he's on the field a lot, will be someone that could go into the backfield a lot, come inside, come outside of the backfield. I wonder how Smith-Njigba might be used in different ways on the field, simply because we know what he can do outside. But I think at the next level, and I even know Ryan Day wants to tap into every piece of potential that Njigba has and what could possibly be his last year at Ohio State. And maybe we could see him in the backfield, see him outside. Imagine shotgun set. All of a sudden, Njigba motions into the backfield. Henderson's on one side, and Njigba on the other. Harrison Jr. on the outside, and whatever other receivers on the other side of the field. That's a nightmare, potential nightmare for opposing defenses, Ryan.
No, it is. And you can get really creative with those guys because, I mean, the wide receiver talent at Ohio State. So, I mean, everyone talked obviously about Jamison Williams getting buried on the depth chart. You have another guy in Julian Fleming, who was a 5-star recruit who people have been talking about, transferring this offseason because he hasn't been able to play a ton because of all the receivers that are around him, So there's a lot that you can do, especially because Notre Dame, Ohio State doesn't typically utilize the tight end much. And I know obviously losing Ruckert this year, I think they have like Cade Stover and G. Scott, I think, was playing some tight end or whatever, but they don't just utilize those guys in the passing game much. So their creativity comes from the wide receiver and the running back position, right? So I think swing screens. I mean, one thing that I would be interested if you watched how Alabama utilized Devonta Smith his last year.
Yes.
Early on in his career, he was more of like he's a different player than Smith-Njigba, but he was an outside receiver, could work back shoulder, could nuance route runner, do all those things. And I remember his game against Notre Dame in the playoffs where like they would literally just line him up in the slot or they would motion him to cross and just throw him swing screens and let him work in space a little bit. So I agree. I think that you can be a little creative with Jaxon Smith-Njigba because I don't want the fact that I don't think has the greatest straight line speed undersell the fact that I think he is good in short spaces and I think he is a good yak guy. Like he does create things after the catch. So while I don't think he's an elite athlete, I think he's a good athlete all the way around and I think he can do some things after the catch. So I would definitely utilize him in any way that I can.
As we look at Njigba's game and him playing, what could he work on? What improvements can he make right now going into the season and also projecting what NFL scouts will be looking at and saying he needs to work on this for him to move up our board?
I think it's more just seeing what you haven't seen yet, and I talked about it a little bit. 89% of the snaps were in the slot, right? So like you just haven't seen him be a creator on the outside much. So I would just like to see what he can do there. Can he be a guy that wins some contested catch situations? Does he have a little more juice than I give him credit for? I don't 100%, to be honest. I don't understand what his baseline is as an outside receiver. I know what he can do as a slot receiver. I know what he can do on the inside. It's an easy thing to watch. Like it doesn't take a good eye to watch Jaxon Smith-Njigba's film and be like, yeah, that translates to the slot. Like that's a pretty easy one, right? Like that's not hard. I just want to know, where else can you separate, right? Like you can separate as a route runner. Can you be a contested catch guy? Can you line up and Z it sometimes? Can you be a mismatch weapon? Devontae Adams is a guy that I think of. It's like he can be a premier slot receiver, but the fact that he can move so many different spots for when he was with Green Bay and now that he's with the Las Vegas Raiders, that's the difference, right? Like that separates you from being a really good receiver to an elite receiver when you can move around a ton. So I hope, just for my selfishness, that I get to see Jaxon Smith-Njigba play a few different spots this coming year. Ohio State probably won't do it because why would they mess with something that's working, right? Like it's not their job to necessarily prepare them for the NFL. It's their job to win football games, and that's what Ryan Day's trying to do with them, obviously. So I don't anticipate him moving around a ton, but for the NFL evaluation part, it would be a big help, and it would improve his stock drastically if he could play outside, if you saw some reps outside, and you could see that it could better translate to maybe being more of a move chess piece than just a slot receiver.
Interesting you say that because we also saw that with Garrett Wilson going from slot to the outside and seeing how not only is he a crazy athlete, is he fast, is he a phenomenal route runner, but we got to see a skill set at the outside and at the inside that we know now the Jets are going to love and say, well, he can do this on the outside, he can do this on the inside. What is the best spot for him in this part of the field for us to move the ball and to be successful? I do think Ryan Day, I don't think. I hope, because I hope there are a lot of things that happen with Ohio State this year. Some at the tight end position. We'll talk about that, guys, on next week's show as we break down every position that Ohio State has on their football team. I hope they put him outside, inside, and motion him a lot and use him to kind of figure out what the opposing secondary is going to do pre-snap. So it allows Stroud to make easier reads. It allows Njigba to get open better. And in turn, is the aftermath, the effect of that, the impact will be Njigba will move up draft boards because we're seeing a better skill set, an all-around skill set from him. Like I said, I hope Ryan Day uses every piece of the potential we have in Njigba during this upcoming season.
It's something, Jay, where like it makes total sense, right? And I honestly am one of these people too. I value guys that can do more, right? Like more things at an elite level. It's very if there's a wide receiver that can play every different spot and can create problems at every different alignment, that player is more valuable than a guy that does one thing really, really well. And we know that Jaxon Smith-Njigba can be a weapon in one spot, but can he be a weapon everywhere? And if he can, then it's going to change my opinion on him a little bit, to be honest, because I'm sure we're going to talk about it a little bit. But right now, I have him more as a mid to late first round type player, which is a really good football player. But right now, I'm seeing him in mock drafts where he's going top 10. And for me, I need to see a little bit more from an alignment perspective. I need to see a little bit more from the ability to give defenses issues and quarrels from multiple alignments. You just need to see it more. Like I loved Garrett Wilson last year because of what you just said. Garrett Wilson can line up anywhere on the field, and he is a mismatch weapon. Like it just is what it is, right? We've seen Smith-Njigba be a mismatch weapon from one particular spot more often than not, but the other remaining alignments are a little bit of a question mark right now.
They are. We are here with Ryan Robertson, Rise and Draft Scouting. He's also a part of the team at Irish Breakdown. He does some recruiting stuff for them. Does a phenomenal job with them, with their recruiting stuff. And Ryan, you mentioned it. I love how Ryan knows what to expect on the show, so I don't have to be the one to just lay out the blueprint. Ryan just reads my mind. Mid to late first round grade on him. That's not crazy. Like that's not crazy. That's not stupid. You're not an idiot. I'm saying things that might be in the YouTube comment section because people will say, why is he at that grade? He had 1,600 receiving yards last year. He's a slot receiver. There is a ceiling on where slot receivers will go in the draft, and I firmly understand why Ryan has him there right now. However, Ryan, we also know offensive linemen will be a hot commodity. There are going to be defensive players, edge defenders that are going to be a hot commodity. Will Bijan Robinson be somebody in that first round? I don't think so, but I have no idea. Mid to late first round grade. That's not crazy to me. Have you got any pushback with people that you've shared that with about where you're putting Njigba right now?
A little bit. More people, not really the range as much. People kind of push back a little bit on my opinion of his athleticism. Because like I said, I don't think he's a great straight line athlete. I think it's okay. I don't think it's great. I think that he's more quick than fast type of player. And some people think that is a little not correct. I don't know what the correctness of that is not legitimate. So that's kind of most of the pushback. Most people, again, if you look at all the mock drafts, he's pretty much the first receiver off the board in every single one and going somewhere top 10 to top 15. Right now, I just value him more 16 to 32 than a guy that's going top 16 type of play, top 15 type of guy. I think that the upside is there if he can show me a little bit more, but I think the main pushback has just been I don't quite see the athlete that some people paint him to be on film.
That's not crazy to me because the athlete, I know you talk about speed, and your look at speed is different than the average person, your former track coach. So I do understand that your brain with that is different than myself or someone else. I watch track. I don't coach it, so I don't know everything that you know about the track and field sport itself. But I completely understand where you're coming from, and you can see in the film his ability to get yak yards is simple because of separation, and he kind of strides that thing out on the field. There's track speed, football speed. He knows how to tap into that football speed very, very well.
Yep.
Ryan, however, when I look at Njigba, how does he stack up against other guys in the country? We haven't talked about comparing him to other receivers around the college football landscape nationally. He didn't win the Biletnikoff Award last year. Jordan Addison's now at USC. We know what Lincoln Riley does with his offense and quarterbacks and receivers. We all have seen that before. How does Njigba stack up against other elite receivers around the country?
I had him in our preseason show as my number 2 wide receiver in the class for next year as it currently stands. I kind of like the Keyshawn Boutte kid from LSU. I think he's a little bit of a different athlete in terms of just explosiveness and short area, just twitch. And I think there's more of an upside to be kind of that inside-outside guy. He actually reminds me a little bit of Garrett Wilson. There's some things that I value tremendously from Garrett Wilson's film that I see in Keyshawn Boutte's tape. That's just a little bit different for me. But I think Jaxon Smith-Njigba is the number 2 guy for me because I think that there's one thing that people fall in love with a little too much sometimes is the upside. And then there's some upside guys in this class like a Quentin Johnston from TCU and Cedric Tillman from Tennessee is that kind of that height, weight, speed guy. And Raheem Jarrett from Maryland was a high recruit kid that, has been, some steady improvements with Maryland over the last couple years as a producer. But for me, what you're getting in Jaxon Smith-Njigba. The moment that he steps foot on campus, that kid is going to be a producer and a potentially special player in the slot. So I really like Jaxon Smith-Njigba for what he is. Do you want my comp, Jay? I think the comp would be fun. Do you want the comp?
Go ahead. All
right, let's do the comp.
He reminds me for it.
He reminds me of Keenan Allen a ton, and Keenan Allen was a kid that when he came out of Cal ran 4.7 or something. And I don't think that's really slow. I don't think Jaxon Smith-Njigba is near that slow. I think he's probably a mid 4.5, high 4.5 type of guy, 4.54 to 4.57 type of dude, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So he's not quite as historically bad of an athlete as a Keenan Allen was, but the ways he wins are very similar, in my opinion, right? It's the craftiness, it's the smoothness, it's the short area quickness, but most of all, it's the ability as a route runner. And while Keenan Allen will never be mixed up with an elite athlete, the athleticism deficiencies on film don't really show up that much because of the role that he plays, and he's just such a glider. He's so smooth and gets in and out of breaks so well. So that's what I see with a Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I think that he could be, if he hits his ceiling, he could be a perennial 100-catch guy on the next level. I think that's very possible. He might be a guy that's perennial slot player, but does anybody care that Keenan Allen does all his work in the slot? No, because he's catching 100 passes a year. He's just a really good football player. So that's what I see with Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I think consistency. I think slot. I think that he can be a Keenan Allen type of player on the next level.
Now we're going to have some fun. This was not a plan for Ryan. I told him beforehand I might throw a curveball at him, but I know he can't handle it. This is nothing crazy, but we're not talking about draft. I am asking Ryan as a college football analyst, forget that ugly flag behind him, to go ahead and kind of project some things for us. I'm going to do some projections of my own. I did them on Tuesday's show. I want Ryan to kind of tap into this. Who has more receiving yards this year, Njigba or Harrison Jr.?
Oh, Njigba. Yeah. Comfortably. I think Harrison Jr., I think people are going to be I'm going to be really excited to watch Harrison Jr. because I think he's going to have near 1,000 yards, and he might even have more touchdowns than a Jaxon Smith-Njigba. But I think Jaxon Smith-Njigba's stats aren't going to be quite as nutty as last year, but I'd still imagine 12 to 1,300 yards and to be the wide receiver 1 for Ohio State.
Touchdowns. You kind of hinted at that one. Who has that one?
Yeah, sorry, I ruined that one. Yeah, I would say Marvin Harrison Jr. I think that he's a guy that could just catch and we talked about. I talked about this with Jay. Sorry, I have a Joe. My God, there's too many J's in my life. But I talked with this about Jay before the show, and I could see Marvin Harrison Jr. having 40 to 50 catches and 15 of them being touchdowns. I could just see some silly number like that. So I'll go with Marvin Harrison Jr. as far as the most touchdowns.
Last one. Who has more receptions, Jaxon Smith-Njigba or Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Jaxon Smith-Njigba. He's got that one comfortably. I would say I wouldn't be surprised if he has 40 to 50 more catches than Marvin Harrison Jr. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. though is going to have a better catch average than him though. I could see Marvin Harrison Jr. averaging 18, 19 yards a catch because he's more the guy that's going to be that true X. That's going to stretch the defense a little more. Last one.
It just hit my head. Who has more drops between these two receivers?
Oh, that one's a tough one, man. That's tough because you would think that Jaxon Smith-Njigba is going to get more targets, right? So, that could be one where he has would you do that to me? I'll say
Gotta have fun, man.
Jaxon Smith-Njigba will have more drops because I actually think he had a few drops last year, but he'll have more drops just mostly because he's going to have a higher volume than Marvin Harrison Jr.
Touche. I get it. Any last comments or words you want to give us about Njigba, things you like about him, college football in specific, the game on September 3rd? I don't care. Any last thing you want to leave us with?
I hope he has a great season, but I hope it's not in the first game of the season.
Well, guys, the show's over. Forget promoting Ryan on Twitter and that idiotic website. No, I'm just playing. Ryan, this is always fun, guys. I joke around with Ryan all the time. We have fun, and I see if you're watching on YouTube, you see him laughing and smiling because he knows I'm just being goofy and joking around. Ryan, it's always fun having you on. We'll have you on down the road. Not sure when. Maybe Paris Johnson Jr. Maybe let you share some hot takes about Zach Harrison. All that good stuff. If you could, let everyone know where they can follow you on Twitter and then where they can catch the stuff going on at Rise and Draft Scouting. And then also if they want to get an early look at the Irish, where can they catch them as well?
Yeah, you can go follow me at Rise and Draft on Twitter. Keep it simple as anything. RiseandDraft.com is the website. It's kind of for draft nerds out there, it's kind of a one-stop shop. So if you want some early scouting reports, we'll have mock drafts at some point this preseason. If you want to look at the prospect database where we have official heights and weights from some NFL spring grades, if you want to go hop in there. So we got everything working over there. And then irishbreakdown.com is on Sports Illustrated. If you want to go there, we have some early stuff on recruiting and team stuff that if you're just kind of self-scouting the Notre Dame football team for the first game, when Notre Dame goes into the shoe and pulls up a huge upset, we have more than enough stuff to keep you guys busy there as well.
And guys, you can follow me on Twitter at jsteven07. The draft is tomorrow, the NBA draft. It's crazy. We're talking about the NFL draft, and then on Thursday, it is the NBA draft. We already have a phenomenal guest lined up for that, talking EJ Liddell, Malachi Branham. We'll actually have another guest at the end of tomorrow's show as well. Still, you can't get away from football. It's too much football stuff to get away from talking about that. So make sure you tapped into tomorrow's show. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Subscribe on the YouTube page, Locked On Buckeyes. Make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening app. I am out of here. I'm glad Ryan is back with us. Have a great rest of your week. Enjoy it. And this weather's here. I wish it was here to stay. Let's enjoy it while we have it.